Okay. I've been fortunate enough, blessed really, to be able to hang out with this car and be expanded a little bit for the last year. And we got to tell this story, we kind of got to go back in time when it kind of all started. It was 1955, and Ed had just come back from a tour in the Air Force. A lot of people didn't know that Ed was a vet, but he was. And he comes back with this passion for cars. He's going to build a car, and he bought a little Model A. And everybody was naming their car or something. It was cool to have a name in Southern California, so he named it the Little Jewel. And he put a lot of chrome on it, did little things to it. His dad didn't want him to have it, but he got it anyway. And anyway, that developed into wanting to go to shows and showing, and he got this urge to do something different than what everybody else was doing. And that was kind of Ed's way. So he started looking at different things that were out there. He noticed there was one guy had built a fiberglass car. Corvette was building fiberglass cars, and he thought, what is this stuff? And he was at Huntington Beach Pier one day. Ed was a surfer too, big gigantic surfer. So if you can imagine, Ed out surfing. So he was at Huntington Beach, and he saw a guy with a surfboard, a wood surfboard covered in this weird material. It was fiberglass, it was waterproof. He thought, man, you can make anything out of that. So he talked to somebody, goes, I bet you make a car. So out of nowhere, he decided to start building a car out of fiberglass. Well, at the time, by this time it was in about 58, he decided, well, let's see what we can do with this thing. So there was no manuals of how to do it, nobody to ask how to do it, no shops were using fiberglass really. So he decided to use a couple different ways, and it was a trial and error kind of deal on how to make this work. And he was buying material, wasting it, throwing it away, and finally come up with this idea of making kind of a buck out of wood and coloring it in plaster. He'd go to the hardware store and he bought thousands of pounds of plaster, and he would take the plaster and he built the frame first, and then he would take this plaster and just swap it all over the place. And I think a pair of shoes for Ed lasted like 2 days, and a pair of pants, he threw them away in like 4 days, because he was just nasty everywhere in this little one-car garage. So he's throwing that plaster all around him, just imagining throwing it and shaping it and doing all these things in his mind. And then he shaped it. And of course, those days, we were talking about this earlier, we were all manly men, so there's no pictures of Ed wearing any mask or any kind of safety stuff. So he's just eating fiberglass, and here at Corvette Museum, no better place than to talk about fiberglass. So he starts shaping the plaster with his hands, his big old hands, and then he starts putting the fiberglass, laying it, and putting the resin on, and then he starts sanding it. And he's making these swoopy things, and he comes up with this. And to this day, I'm a car builder in the modern world, and to this day, this car still stands out as a super example of an awesome show car to this day. With these standards, we could go in and this car would show and would do pretty well. And it had all the cool things for the time. It had a Cadillac mill, and this mill was done by one of the great builders and a real good friend of Mickey Thompson. And his name was Fritz Voigt. Built this motor, and it was painted by Larry Watson. Famous Larry Watson. Has a Martinez interior in it, Chevrolet steering wheel, but it's a one-off and nobody had ever seen it. So when he came out with this thing, he was calling it Excalibur, and it had a sword from his family's, his wife's family had a sword that had been passed down for years. He was going to use that as a shifter, and so he's going to call it Excalibur. So he starts taking it to Southern California shows. And he shows up, and all these guys have Monterey's and T's and 32s and stuff, and then this. And they're like, oh no, I'm not in his class. I'm not going to show it. No way. So they start protesting that he's at the shows. So Ed felt kind of bad about it. I mean, he'd been picked on in school because he was a German immigrant and this is during the end of the Depression and into World War II, so he was always picked on. And there was one thing I read that his pants used to end up on flagpoles a lot from being picked on, if you can imagine big old Ed. And so anyway, that kind of come back to him. It was, he's getting picked on again. So he decided, well, I'm kind of like an outlaw. So he just named the car Outlaw. Then a funny thing happened. he started going to shows, and promoters started noticing everybody was asking, when's Roth going to get here? When's he bringing his cool car? So they started asking Ed to come as a feature. So from then on, Ed pretty much was a feature wherever he went. He kind of beat the system with the Outlaw. And people used to stand in line all around the auditoriums to come see whatever crazy thing Ed did. And then along with that, not only were the cars like this, these fabulous creations that nobody had ever saw, Ed was like that. So here comes this big guy in with this big presence. Looks like a big, tough guy. He's really to talk to. He's the sweetest, most approachable guy there ever was. And Revell Model Company comes to him and with an offer to make the cars. And the rest is pretty much history. He signed a deal with Revell. That was real equitable for both of them. Of course, Ed got a penny for each kit they sold, and that kicked off to being like $30,000, $35,000 first year in royalties. And he says, well, man, should have asked for 2 cents. That was Ed's way. But this is what kind of started this whole thing that we're giving tribute to, is this car here. And to pay for the chrome that he put on this, he had to sell little jewels because his chrome bill got too high. So, but his formula always was have enough money off the next car or whatever, trading or whatever, to build the next car. So he always, even when he was doing this, he's building the next car in his mind. And that's what this is the progression. And this has inspired builders, artists, songwriters, dreamers of all types to dream big and go after your dreams and just keep going. And it just keeps getting better as the cars go, like the Big Nick and Mr. Ron. But there's the story pretty much. This is 1958, this came out. Also, there's another really cool thing. This car was debuted at a really vague, unknown show at Disneyland one year. Walt Disney was talked into having a car club show at Disneyland. This 1958, September 5th of 1959, actually 1959, September 5th, 1959. And now at the time, in hot rods in Southern California, most municipalities were trying to outlaw hot rodding altogether. It was really an outlaw deal, because along with what went with this was youth and guys that were having a good time and getting a little, probably drinking beer and not doing the greatest things, drag racing down in the middle of it. was 1959, so people didn't like it. So Mr. Disney, he liked to keep things very mainstream. So somebody said, let's have the Disneyland Car Club Auto Rama or something like that. It was Auto Show or something. So they had it on Main Street Disney. It opened in 55, so it's a Main Street Disney, original layout. So they had all the cool California custom car guys brought their cars. And George Barris was there, I think Gene Winfield was there, Ed was there, I mean everybody was there. So they had a really good time. And there towards the end of the day though, they got out in the parking lots and started kind of doing burnouts, and they had some issues with some of the parking attendants and stuff, and so Mr. Disney said never, never, never again. But this was the public debut for this car at Disneyland. So I mean, things for Ed just kind of was going that way, where things were special. And he was able to do some really cool things that we get to enjoy to this day, and this is such a cool deal to be able to honor not just the things that Ed did, but Ed himself, because Ed was so much more about family and this wonderful Rat Fink family and friends and teaching and inspiring people than he ever was with stuff. Because stuff to Ed was just something to make other stuff with. So he never got really concerned with the trappings of, let's fill my garage up with 800 cars. He didn't do that. So anyway, that's my little take on the Outlaw, and I'll tell you about something else.